Hello everyone, this is Professor Massey. I'm providing this short video to help to alleviate some of the confusion that arises with some of the assignment instructions in the class. And I understand and I agree. There is some confusion. There are some confusing instructions in the assignments in this course. And I want to try and alleviate that. And I understand that it's frustrating. It was frustrating for me when I first started teaching the course a few semesters ago. And now I understand what is expected, and I want to share that with you. The best thing that I have found is to go to the rubric for each discussion and for each assignment. And that is why, for example, in the weekly announcements, and this is the week 3 announcement, in every weekly announcement, I always have a section called deliverables and the discussion question or questions and the assignment if there is one. In week 3, there were two threads for the discussion question, internal and external. But what's important here is, here's what it says. Here is the rubric that you should use as a guide, since I will use this same rubric when evaluating your work. Here is the rubric you should use as a guide, since I will use the same rubric when evaluating your work. I understand the importance of going to these rubrics, and I will always provide the corresponding rubric for each discussion, and discussions, it's always the same, threaded discussion rubric, and for each assignment. I will always provide those because I know that they are important. All right, so let's go to the milestone 2 conditions communication strategy guidelines and rubric and use that as an example for this video. Use this same process for each of the assignments and for the discussions, and you will understand exactly what is required for each assignment and for each discussion, and it'll, I hope, alleviate the confusion and the frustration. Okay, so let's look at this scenario, or excuse me, at this this document. So each of the milestones has this paragraph. As a marketing consultant, you will need to advise clients, etc. The scenario for each one is different. In this one, as you will remember, we just worked on this last week in week 3. An overseas contractor that is a major supplier to your chosen company has recently been revealed as one that operates with poor working conditions for employees. So you were to respond to that. In Module 3, you submitted the conditions communication strategy. It's important to remember that terminology, that term for this assignment, because you'll also see it in the final project. And by the way, on the final project in this class is not some kind of a term paper kind of a thing where it's all from scratch. In fact, the final project for this class is a culmination of all of the milestones and a few of the discussion questions that you've already responded to. So doing the final project isn't like doing a term paper from scratch. You're taking work that you've already done, editing it based on my feedback, all of the feedback that you think has been valuable, synthesizing and integrating it, and putting a bow on it, so to speak, and submitting it as one final project. Okay? So getting back to this one, in Module 3, you will submit the conditions communication strategy for the presented scenario. For the strategy, you'll select either educational, informational, or persuasive, or a combination. The guidelines provide examples of each one of those. And now we get to the real meat of this, and that is the critical elements. This is what must be addressed, or in other words, what must be included in your document. Communication context. This is the scenario plus your chosen company. Communication need. Why is it necessary to respond? In this case, with your internal audience, it was necessary to respond so that your employees would know what was going on, for example. With the external audience, let's say you created a news release, and you did that because you want to be a transparent company. And also, more pragmatically, you know that the media is going to find out. With social media and so many media outlets available to people, if you want to find something out, it's going to be found out. So somebody's going to find this out anyway. So we might as well be in front of it. So that is the need, the communication need. Internal communication, you explain the type of communication and the purpose. You identify the target audience, and you develop draft communication. External communication, same three requirements. Explain the type and purpose, the target audience, and develop the draft communication. And on these draft communications, this is, I believe, where the confusion, some of the confusion lay in the week 3 discussion and assignment. I had some people ask me in the course room and an email, aren't these the same thing? What's the difference between these things? Am I reading this right? Yes, you were reading this right. Here's what the ideal plan or model was for the discussion and the assignment in week 3. You were to post your internal and external draft communications in the discussion question. You would then receive feedback from me, which you did, and from your classmates. You would then take that feedback, incorporate all of the feedback that you thought was pertinent and valuable, and then refine those draft communications and include them as part of this week 3 assignment, milestone 2. Okay? That's where the overlap was between the discussion and the assignment. Okay, so we've just gone through a big part of this. Let me go back up. So we started here, communication context. These are the critical elements: communication context, communication need, internal communication, type and purpose, internal communication, target audience, internal communication, draft. External communication, type and purpose, external communication, target audience, and external communication, draft. Conditions, communication strategy. What was the strategy you used? Justify it. So we get to the guidelines for submission. All of your work at Southern New Hampshire University is required to be in APA format. Based on this class, I would say you vary from people who know APA fairly well to people who don't know it at all. No one is expert at it. I'm close to probably being expert at it, partly because I've worked with it for a long time, and partly because I've read, I don't know, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of student papers that are written in APA style. So I'm just familiar with it. And it's just like one of those things, just like a software program. Say, like Photoshop. It's hard to use Photoshop like once every 6 months. You've got to learn Photoshop. You got to use it all the time to be very good at it. And the same is true with style like APA or MLA or others. You've got to use them all the time to be good at them. Pardon me. So one of the things that, as you know, in my feedback to you in your assignments that I'm trying to do with you is to help you learn APA style. It is required. So as you see here, double-spaced document, 12-point Times New Roman font, 1-inch margins. Those are all standard requirements for APA documents. Other APA formatting guideline requirements are things like always including a title page, citing and referencing your references, the work that you are using to support your own writing. Those references are done and cited in particular ways in APA style, and I have worked with you and will continue to work with you to try to help you to improve your APA style. So please take advantage of that. It also includes here the requirement that you submit your work in Word, Microsoft Word. And if you don't have Microsoft Word, then you can get freeware and use some open source software. I believe that you are able to get Office 360, a subscription to that. gratis, included in the cost of your tuition. So check on that, because you can get, that's the latest version of Microsoft Office. I mentioned that because some students have submitted their work in PDF, the portable file document. And I love PDF. This document that we're looking at right now is PDF, and I love PDF. But it has limitations. If you've ever tried to edit a PDF document, you know that that's next to impossible. So one thing that really benefits me if you submit your assignments in Microsoft Word is that I'll be able to more easily and readily edit your work into APA style, for example. So please do submit your work in Microsoft Word. So let's look then at the rubric. And what we're going to see is that those exact same critical elements that we just enumerated, that were listed in the guidelines, are now listed in the rubric. Communication context, communication need, internal type and purpose, internal target audience, internal draft communication, external type and purpose, external target audience, external draft communication, communication strategy. We looked at every one of those as critical elements. They are all included in the rubric. There is nothing there are no curveballs here. There's nothing no magic tricks where we're pulling something out of our hat. This is where the beauty of rubrics is. I love rubrics. Rubrics provide this kind of certainty for us. We know as faculty exactly what's required and exactly what we must evaluate you on. You know as a student exactly what is required and exactly what you will be evaluated on. If you look at this and any rubric, you look at this one, and you look at these different categories of evaluation. Proficient, needs improvement, not evident. All right, so on the communication context, for example, provides an overview of the scenario using the chosen company to provide appropriate context for the situation. All right, so that's what I'm going to get. I'm going to get proficient if I do that. On the other hand, if I don't do that well, if I only provide a limited overview of the scenario and I don't fully utilize the chosen company to provide an appropriate context, I'm going to need improvement. If I don't do it, then I'm going to get 0 points for it. All right? So you know this, I know this. In fact, if I evaluate your work in a way that you don't think corresponds to the work you did, and the same with any instructor you have, if they grade you in a way that you think doesn't reflect the work that you did, isn't a fair evaluation, contact the instructor, contact me. Say, why didn't I get proficient on this? I thought I was proficient. Okay, so again, these are the criteria that you are being evaluated on, the critical elements. There's no surprises, okay? And finally, articulation of response. This is included in all of the written assignments in the class, and this has to do with presentation, grammar, and other kinds of presentation and writing errors, okay? So if it's free or having no major errors, then you're getting proficient. Okay, if it has a lot of errors or it's full of errors, you're going to get fewer points. All right, now let's look at the specific rubric. This is the exact rubric that I used evaluating your work. This is the Marketing 690, that's the class we're in, Milestone 2, Conditions Communication Strategy rubric. This is it. Again, no curveballs here, nothing coming out of left field. These are the exact critical elements that we've just seen in the guidelines and rubric, all right? And they are exactly written here as we just saw, okay, in that guidelines and rubric document. Communication context, proficient, needs improvement, not evident. Communication need, internal type and purpose, internal target audience, internal draft communication, external type and purpose, external target audience, external draft communication, communication strategy, articulation of response. You see that when I include all of these, for instance, I included in this sample, it was all proficient. It comes to 75 points out of 75. All right. On the other hand, and this little rubric allows an instructor just to click the heading and it selects all. And if you needed improvement on every one, you would have gotten 56.25 points out of 75. That score eventually would have been transferred to here once the instructor clicks the save button. But that is exactly how this process works. Okay, now let's look at a sample paper. One of the things that you will see in the announcements also, I posted this last week on October 13. I mentioned that one of the challenges of the assignments is including the draft communications and meeting all of those critical elements that we've just talked about. Doing all of that in a paper that can only be 3 to 5 pages in length. If we go back to the guidelines and rubric document, okay, so the page length requirements were 3 to 5 pages, not including the title page and the references. Okay, so that means that the title page doesn't count, the reference pages don't count, and the appendices also do not count. Okay, so now we've got a better chance of meeting all of these critical elements if we take the draft communications and we place them in appendices rather than placing them in the text of the paper. So there are 2 reasons why we use appendices. First, it helps to organize the document. If I include things, these required elements in order: the context, the need, internal type and purpose, internal target audience, and then I insert a draft communication in there, it's a bit, let's say, cumbersome to try to find that and then go down to the external, and the organization, the internal structure of your paper isn't going to be as sound or solid as it is if you include this as an appendix. So the first reason is that it helps us to organize the work. The second reason that we use appendices is that the appendices do not count toward page length requirements. So I encourage you to use these page length, to use appendices to view. I'm doing 5 things at once. I encourage you to include your draft communications in all of your assignments in this class as appendices, okay, for those 2 reasons. All right, now let's look at the document that I supplied last week. We were looking at that appendix announcement a few moments ago. This is the document that I provided as a sample. That document is also a milestone 2 response and assignment. So it would have also prepped you for how to do this assignment if you took a look at that. So let's examine this in light of what we've just figured out in terms of those critical elements. One thing that you'll see that I've done, this particular student, I named the student Joe Student, just to, to keep the person who actually did write the document anonymous. But this student wrote this paper, this student knew and knows APA style quite well. And other than not including an introduction that previews the purpose and the main points and providing a conclusion that reviews the purpose and the main points of the paper, a stellar job. You'll see that sometimes I am recommending to you that you include an introduction that previews the purpose of the paper and the main points of the paper. Please do that. It will help organize your writing tenfold, and I always encourage people to do that. Okay, so let's see how well this person did. One of the other things that I recommend is that you take each of the required elements and use that as a heading. Communication context, communication need, internal type and purpose, target audience, draft communication. All right, so let's see how well this student did in that regard. The student didn't include an introduction really. The student went right into communication context. And APA requires that you restate the title verbatim from the title page right above the text right here, and that the student did well. and then didn't include a heading like the student did here, which also was done well, of communication need, the second critical element. This first section, though, if an introduction were included, then going and having a heading that says communication context, that's what this text in these two paragraphs provides. And having those headings is also very valuable to do. It helps organize your writing. You know that in this section, for example, everything in this section is about the communication need. I know, and all other readers then know, that everything in this section is about the communication need critical element. All right, so it corresponds exactly and specifically to each critical element. All right, once the communication need was done, the student then went to internal communication, then went to external communication. So rather than having, say, subheadings, which you could have subheadings of type and purpose, target audience. You could have those here. It's not necessary to get that detailed, and this student did a fine job of including that information here under the internal communication heading. And then external communication heading includes type and purpose, target audience. Here we have, for example, sent to the media, so that's the target audience for the external communication, which was a news release. And then the external communication. Oh, and by the way, this student also uses the appendices well, and says see Appendix A for the internal communication, says see Appendix B for the external communication. So there are our other, the third element, critical elements of the internal communication and external communication categories, the draft communications. So we finish talking about external communication, and then we go to the conditions communication strategy. So we've just gone through external target audience. Draft communication was referred to in the appendix. Now we're at communication strategy. What has the student done? Labeled it. Communication conditions communication strategy. All right. And I would recommend then providing a conclusion next. This student didn't provide one. I would encourage you to do so. Provides references in APA style. And then what do we get to? The appendices. Appendix A. These pages do not count toward your page length, so they don't count toward the page length requirements. So also the formatting is different on our appendices usually. This allows for the formatting that is a change in formatting. It doesn't break away for in our internal structure of our document. I really like the use of appendices for those reasons. It's done well here by this student. Okay, so that is that. And I really hope that this helps you. I believe that it will. Take this same approach for every single assignment in the class. Go to the discussion thread rubric and look at that rubric and see exactly what you are going to be evaluated on. Faculty at Southern New Hampshire must use those rubrics, and I've shown you exactly how that's done, and I do hope that this will help you to alleviate the confusion, alleviate the frustration, and help you to do as well as you want to do on the assignments and the discussions in this class. Take care. Bye-bye. By the way, I was using Cam Studio. I needed a software program to do this. Sometimes for purposes like this where assignments are unclear in their instructions, or maybe there's a technical problem in a classroom. How do I get to this particular place in the course room in Blackboard or something like that? Sometimes I need this kind of technology, and I went and searched and I found this one, which is called Cam Studio. It is open source, which also means freeware. That means that it's open and available to anyone. I would recommend, if you have a need for this kind of software, software, this was really easy to learn. It took me less than an hour to figure it all out. There are YouTube videos that describe its use, these various toolbar options that are available to you. There really wasn't a lot that I needed to figure out. And voila. So not a very big learning curve and a really valuable tool if you need it. So thanks much. Bye-bye.